this computer. Okay, we're on.
So good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending where you are. Really excited today, always excited. My name is Aneesh de Vos, and the amazing and ponderful, I think we called you, didn't we, David? David Butler is with us today, but my greatest excitement, apart from David being here, is that Madeleine Black is with us today. Madeleine has a title of the Courage Cultivator. She is an author, she is a psychotherapist, a TEDx speaker, an international speaker. And what she does is she helps others to find their courage and voice. And she does that through her own unique narrative. And today, when we'd had a chat before, Madeleine and I, despite technical difficulties, went along the concept of, we want to talk today about trust your gut and trust your instinct. Really, really important. And often when we are in trauma response, we get disconnected from that trust your gut and trust your instinct. It's physiological and it's an emotional thing that can happen to us. So Madeleine, what I would like to do is just kind of hand it over to you a little bit so you can give us a brief narrative of where you are. And I think we were just saying, weren't we, that is it about that you come out on the other side when you've experienced a trauma, or is it that you come somewhere different and that you become different?
Yeah, I don't
a lot to answer.
I don't know the answer to that, but I know that where I've got to hasn't been an overnight fix. You know, I have to be very clear with that. It's been many, many years. It's been a huge healing journey and a process, and it's taken lots of different types of therapy and soul searching, not just talking therapy, body therapies as well, because I, like you, I don't believe the trauma was in my mind, it was in my body. So I had to work it very physically and do a lot of kind of therapeutic body work. But yeah, I am in a really good place now, and I wouldn't be able to speak and write about rape or sexual violence if I really didn't consider myself healed or able to do it. So now that I am in a really good place, it feels like now it's my duty or my responsibility to speak out, to really help end the shame, because the shame just silenced me for years and years, and the secrets grow in shame. You know, it's just a horrible thing, shame. But by speaking out, it's shattered any shame, and I really don't care who knows about my story anymore. But I'm determined to end the shame, the stigma, and the silence, and as you said, to help other people find their courage and their voice, because I believe when we don't speak out, then we really just hold ourselves back in some way.
Absolutely, and very, very eloquently put. And I'm always one. David, sometimes his connection goes in and out. I think it's happened. Oh, you're with us, David. I am always one that talks about shame. I was in a training last night. I'm training with Gabor Mate, and he was talking about shame as a protector.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that was a really interesting way of looking at it, that in some way shame kind of steps forward to protect you from something that is so painful. And as you've just said, you have spent many, many years getting to where you are right now, and you're now in a place where you can be vocal and can. And I love the fact that you see that as your responsibility, that, you are going to talk about this, you are going to say that this happened to you. And that for me is an incredibly brave thing to do. And I'm sure there are many, many people across the world, and many people who are watching this, that will thank you for doing that. How then, if shame is almost a protector, because it's just shutting everything down and keeping you away from that patterning, be that, as we've said, in your body or your mind, what do you think about that, Madeleine? I kind of think I've put you on the spot, but I just think it's an interesting thing to bring up.
It's an interesting perception of shame. I think shame is many things, because shame is also my guilt, my misbeliefs that I was dirty, contaminated, worthless. I was filled with self-loathing, self-hatred, no confidence, no self-belief. And that was all to do with shame and the judgment. So protection, I don't know if I completely 100% agree. I think shame can make many, many different appearances. But my fear, the shame, was that if people knew what had happened to me, that they wouldn't want to know me, that they would be as disgusted with me as I was with myself, because it just left me contaminated, and just the feelings of dirty and just horrible feelings. And I wrongly assumed that other people would look at me the way I incorrectly look at myself. So that was what my shame was about. I understand a little bit what he means about protection, because I think after any trauma, but I don't know if it's shame, I just numbed out and I just shut off, and I actually even stopped speaking for about 3 years when I was a young teenager. So maybe that was my protection. And I do believe our memories come back when we're ready to face them. Whether I believe that or not, I argued with my mind when all my memories returned. But yeah, it's an interesting concept. But I think shame has many, many, many levels and will mean very different things to different people.
Definitely, it seems a very multifaceted part of ourselves, doesn't it? And as you say, it comes up and presents itself as in very differing ways. And shame can be infused by many different things, can't it? It can be infused by sadness, be infused by anger, be infused by almost like a delirium. We've talked before, haven't we, David, about how humour becomes part of our reaction to trauma. And as always, I'm always mentioning Billy Connolly, but you know, one of the things that he says is that that's when we are our most vulnerable, because you are expressing yourself, aren't you? You are sharing yourself to show how you're feeling, and you are incredibly vulnerable, because what you're actually doing is that deflection of making people laugh so that you can still get a chance to tell your story. David, have you got anything that you looked in your one of your pondful moments, and I just wondered if you'd got anything to add in
there we go again. I was just looking at it from a therapist's point of view, and you know, I was listening intently to Madeleine talking about shame, and it was as you say, I don't even know whether it's getting past, getting through, dealing with, coping with, handling, learning to live with, all of those things, and many different things to many different people. But for me, and in my practice also, I've experienced a seminal moment in therapy itself, and in looking at your story, Madeleine, you mentioned that your therapy, and it seemed there was a point at which you sort of allowed yourself to accept what was going on and the help. And although I know, and for me too, it's not a quick fix, there is no magic wand. But for me, there was a seminal moment where it hit me that what I was doing was putting myself through so much. And I saw some of that coming from you when you the TED talk and what I've read about you, which is not as much as I'd like to at the moment, but I will continue to do that. And I just wonder your thoughts around that point in therapy when you just allow yourself to accept what's going on and take the help.
Yes, so when my eldest daughter became 13, obviously the same age that I was when I was gang raped, all of my memories returned. And for me, they returned in my dream state. So I would have nightmares and it would be new information. And I just thought, well, if it was that bad, I would remember it. But now I understand that we shut it down and it comes back. But I was starting to see, because I was caught in denial, I didn't want to accept these memories. And again, that was my shame and my trauma speaking to me, because I also thought if I voiced it to my therapist what I saw, he would be disgusted and he wouldn't want to work with me, because, you know, it brought up all those feelings of what I said before. But I got to a point where I saw I am actually going to drive myself crazier with my denial and my refusing to accept it than the pictures themselves. I mean, the pictures were like a porn film running through my mind. It was very disturbing, but I saw I actually had potential to do myself more damage. And so I had to get to a place where I thought, you know, well, I have survived it. I am okay. These are just pictures now. It's not happening anymore. And I just thought, okay, I have to accept it because I am going to cause more damage. I'm going to drive myself crazy. And that for me was the point, well, yeah, I am okay. I'm not my body. I'm not what they did to me. You know, I'm so much more than what they did to my body. I do believe that the goodness, the essence, our hara, our light, whatever you call it, what we're born with, they could never ever touch that. That could never be touched by what they did to me. But that took years and years of digging and diving, and I just didn't want this to hang over me all of my life. But if I could go back in time, I would say you would save a lot of money and a lot of time if you stopped denying it. But obviously that was part of my process, so I had to do that.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting when I saw they're not doing this to me, it's me doing this to me now, and me just really screwing my mind up. So I had to just go, okay, it's done, it's finished, it's not happening anymore. And that helped. That really helped. That was a huge turning point.
And is that then when you believe that you actually connected back to that trusting your gut and your instinct? Is it at that point, had you been disconnected from that?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I was then trusting my gut, but everything was a lot more peaceful because I'd given up my battle, you know, I was in a war with my mind, and I had weapons, and I guess it allowed me just to drop all of my weapons. So yeah, I guess it's also, you know, that night when it happened to me, I very much left my body. It was an out-of-body experience. And for years, I've struggled to get back in. So in that moment as well, I just felt so connected and grounded in. So I guess, yeah, it's about trusting my gut at that point, listening to my body, that actually you don't need to fight anymore. It's done, it's over. But as you know, the trauma is trapped in our bodies and the energy is trapped. And I think just working it and working it and working it for years slowly diluted that energy. So it got to a point where I could watch the story in my mind and not be disturbed by it. So it was a combination of many things, I think. I think I worked the energy out. It was, you know, I just depleted all of the energy. The sting of it didn't impact on me in any way. So I'd gone from someone crying and being sick and shaking in sessions to someone that could just go, yeah, okay, it's just a story now, it's just pictures, old pictures. So I guess that was landing back into my body, which is when we can trust our gut and when we can trust our instinct. And it's a lot more peaceful.
When I work with clients, if we're talking about trauma, and they say, well, I know it happened, but I'm not part of it. I say, well, I use some bizarre metaphors, but I would say, well, you're like a little raspberry, aren't you? And you are stuck in an ice cube, and until we start melting that, you're going to stay there, you know, because raspberries are nice and sweet, aren't they? So to get back to you, we've basically got to melt the ice around it a little bit.
Yeah, that totally resonates because my family didn't know for years what had happened, and I shut down and I numbed out, and they used to call me the Ice Maiden. So,
oh gosh.
And that's what I felt like. I had defrosted myself. You know, now in this process, I was slowly just defrosting. I put myself in the deep freeze, so that analogy is just perfect for me. And that's what it feels like. I've just defrosted. I slowly set my defrost button, and yeah, it's defrosted now completely.
Well, I'm glad that you got back to your raspberry state.
Yes,
absolutely. I shall know to use that more when I'm working therapeutically now. What I would like to, and if it's okay with you, David and Madeleine, is just because I am a somatic worker, so I would be really intrigued if you would like to share. I mean, I could bleat on about this for hours, but as you know, in the role of the person that is facilitating the therapeutic session, but what does it feel like for you as the person that's experiencing the somatic work?
Well, the very first time I went, when I was caught in denial, my therapist suggested to go and have some therapeutic body massage. And I went and I lay on the massage couch, and I could hear this person shouting and screaming and fighting and kicking with the therapist. And I thought, who is making all that noise? And then I realized it was me. It was all coming from me. And in some ways, I couldn't trust my mind because, I just couldn't trust all those memories, but I had to trust my body. I was a shy English woman who wouldn't make a fuss like that in a session. But this was such a bodily, visceral reaction that I could not, refuse to accept. I had to accept that I could not make my body respond that way on purpose. There's no way I would cause such a fuss. So it actually embarrassed me, but it totally helped. It really helped. And that just led me on this journey of trying so many other kind of body therapies, breath work, sweat lodges. I've taken plant medicine. I've just done loads, walked on fire, danced, I've seen a shaman. I've done, you name it, I've probably tried a lot of therapies.
And it goes to show, doesn't it, that there is a need for a change in how we are approaching not just experiences that are perceived as trauma, but other things that are affecting the wellness of our mental health. Did I say that correctly for you, David? The wellness of our mental health? Because you get a little bit antsy, don't you, when people talk about mental health?
Well, yeah. The clinical model, I'm not going there right now.
Just wanted to check in. But
wellness is great, yeah.
Wellness, we'll go into that. But I do think that it's
pretty good.
that there's a time of change that is coming in to the psychotherapeutic world. Would you say so? I'll ask it to both of you. Would you say that there is a time of change occurring now, that it's not just going to be this cognitive conception all the time? David?
You dropped out all the way through that. I'm sorry, Aneesh.
I said, do you think?
Just see your lovely face and nothing else. Nothing else.
Thank you. Do you think that there's a time of change now in the psychotherapeutic world or therapy world? Because we are not just this cognition, and as Madeleine has just absolutely beautifully explained. And do you think that time is now? And what difference is it going to make in how we approach? And like I say, not just people that have an experience of trauma, but in general practice. Do we as therapists now have to trust our gut and then and not come away from models, but open the model up a little bit?
Personally speaking, I've always trusted my gut in therapy. Going from my very first client, who I will never forget, some of my greatest fear as a recently qualified, or one of my fears as a recently qualified practitioner, was A, I didn't want to go near bereavement. B, I was unsure around young females, and I happened to be working in a secondary school at the time. And I had very little experience with trauma. So my first client was a young lady who had just lost her mum. So that was a baptism of fire. But in supervision later, I recall going through what had happened in therapy, and it was a case of just holding someone there. There's often nothing you can do and nothing you can say in that moment, but just to be there, and knowing that she was being heard was enough at that time. And that was very much a gut reaction to what was right in front of me. So I am one of the converted. I'm very much with going with feelings and going with the gut and going with an instinct and following that through. And that's at that point where, yes, I am trained in a particular modality, but at that point in time, it's all about the relationship.
Yeah.
And how you feel in that relationship.
Yeah, definitely. What do you think, Madeleine?
Well, I actually stopped working about a year ago as a psychotherapist, so I'm not sure what's going on right now in the therapeutic world. But I have a particular model that I'm trained in, and I just would go with my gut half the time in my sessions. And sometimes I would say things I think, where did that come from? And it would resonate so much with my client. It would just spot on feedback, and I think that's really obviously we can't ask a client to connect if we're not connected in with ourselves. So we have to really be grounded and listening to our own bodies, what's going on in the session. And that's when the magic always happened, when you're really, really there. You know, you have to just show up as a therapist. We're asking them to show up as a client. Obviously, we can only meet so far. But yeah, when I really, really show up for them, then yeah, that's definitely that the gut speaks to me, my mind, and I think, oh, don't know where that came from, but I'm just, it has to just come out of my mouth. And then I think, oh, did I say that? But it always hits the spot. So yeah, I always trust my gut in the sessions.
Sounds familiar.
Yes, me too. I literally sometimes think, and I'll say to them, I have no idea where that came from. And they're just like, because I use lots of humour, and they're like, do you know what, Aneesh, it worked. I'm like, okay, let's go with it.
As you said, humour's so good because it renders us from holding everything together. We're open, and then it can dive in deeper, doesn't it? So yeah,
totally.
I laughed a lot in my sessions. We did.
Yeah.
I think what the medical model has done is probably industrialized, unfortunately, psychotherapy to some extent. And I think the ultimate fix is to create more room for people rather than a diagnosis. And that's where I come from.
Yeah, when a client would come to me and say, I've got this letter from my doctor, this is my diagnosis. I said, well, I don't want to see that. I'd like to hear what you think is the problem. I don't want to read any doctor's notes, thank you. So yeah, no, I absolutely agree.
Yeah, I always say, oh, thank you very much for telling me what's wrong with you. So now can you tell me what's happened to you?
Yeah.
And it totally changes the dialogue into a richer narrative. It gives more exploration and actually explanation. Not a massive fan of diagnoses, but equally I also understand that it gets funding, and some people feel as though that they need that, and then they feel that they can work from and go forwards from that. I'm very interested, Madeleine, to ask you, in terms of your recovery and your shift within yourself, do you think that impacted how you worked?
Yeah, I suppose it did. I mean, I worked in a general counselling centre, but somehow I always attracted rape and abuse clients, and I thought this is, I was a magnet for them. I would say about 90%, but then I guess so many people have got that underneath as well that we don't know about. But yeah, it has changed. It did change the way I worked, definitely, because when more of me turns up in the session, it's going to allow more of my client to turn up as well. And I think back to when I first started, I was a volunteer at Rape Crisis or Women's Aid, and I wasn't emotionally available. I mean, I wasn't therapeutically trained in those days. And I think if I went into that situation, it would be very, very different work. It would be very different because I always call it cleaning up. When I cleaned up my trauma, and I defrosted my raspberries, there's more of me that showed up, more of me that wasn't even there before. So it allows growth. I do believe there is post-traumatic growth, and I saw it with my dad, I've seen it with my mum, and I don't know whether that's just the survivor genetics that I have, but definitely it did change me. I don't expect everybody obviously to stand on a stage and share their story, but that just shattered any shame, and doing the very things that we think we can't do is definitely what grows us. That's where standing on that stage in front of 2,000 people was terrifying and the most liberating moment in my life, and the impact it's now had with other people, sharing their stories with me for the very first time. I get messages most days. So kind of gone off your question there, haven't I? But yeah, definitely has. I couldn't have done the work I did with clients if I hadn't done the work with myself.
And I think there's something in that, isn't there? I think because obviously the helping profession by its very nature gets people that want to help, and if we are locked back into our own thing that needs helping, and we're thinking that it will get fixed by helping others, we know that it doesn't, does it? Whether or not we are consciously doing that, or it's
interesting because a lot of people assume I went into the therapy because of what happened to me, but it was actually because of what happened to my dad. I don't know if we had this conversation when we spoke earlier, but my dad was a Holocaust survivor, and he lost his mum and his dad, brothers and sisters. His youngest brother was only 6 when they were all murdered. And he had a sister who survived, my Auntie Eva. She had chronic schizophrenia, agoraphobia, OCD, paranoia, never left. If she did, she had to go home. If she had a motorbike, it was the Gestapo. And then there was my dad, who was the funniest man I know. He always played practical jokes on all of us. He met my mum, had 5 of us. He loved life, he mucked about. And that intrigued me, why 2 people can have a similar experience. Obviously, it's never going to be the same experience because we come at it very differently, but they could come out so differently. Just always, as a child, how's my dad loving life and how's my aunt terrified of life? And that was really what I wanted to explore in the therapeutic world, that we know ourselves. If we get, I don't know, you spoke about grief. If I had 2 clients that both lost their dad, one could say, I'm devastated, I'll never get over it, he was the best dad and I'll never recover, I'm heartbroken. Or one could say, I'm so grateful that he was my dad. You know, it's just, I always was intrigued how we respond so differently. So that's really, I think from a young age, I wanted to understand people.
So it's a real, you know, it's that always that question, isn't there, of this nature nurture.
Yeah.
I'm honest to goodness, I read about this and I've read many different things. I still don't think that can ever be answered.
I do think we get conditioned a lot by our experiences, and I like to think that we all come in pretty similar. You know, when you look at a baby, I've never seen a baby that's got a label on it, just a blank little gorgeous bundle.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think it's a lot by our experiences, our conditioning, how we're brought up, what we're fed, you know, mentally. Lots of factors. And I think hurt people as well.
Hurt people do hurt people, and hurt people are hurt by people as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
They truly are.
And I really just think we are an immature species living on a planet, and we have a lot to learn.
We certainly do have a lot to learn.
Yeah.
Today's recording that's gone out is about sustainability and trauma, and there is a massive amount that we have to learn. David, I know that one of your passions is exactly what one of your things that you look into and read about a lot is about. Now, do we call it transgenerational or intergenerational, David?
Intergenerational transmission of trauma.
There we go.
Got me into being a therapist, coming from my father's side and the history through the First World War. So it's not a dissimilar story. But it took me a while to find out what was going on for me. Mm-hmm. And when I traced it back, although, you know, my father was 2nd generation of shell shock, as it was known then. He was looked after by his uncle, who came back, unfortunately, a very, very damaged person, both physically and emotionally. And that transference took place. I wondered where my behaviour came from, etc. My unacceptable behaviours, and yeah, it was a revelation to find out. Again, I guess I could give it a label, which is contradicting where I'm coming from, but knowing what the source was a revelation. Yeah. And healing.
Yeah, but I think for me, in some ways, my dad's background has had a positive impact on me. I've inherited all his survivor skills, and his, you know, it wasn't really what he said, but I saw that through him, if we choose to, we can get past anything and you can have a great life. And he did love life. He said, life's not for looking back, it's for looking forward. And I remember I read this book called Super Survivors, and I didn't know if it was a genetic thing or whether it was just by, you know, watching it as someone else. And I did contact the authors. It was 2 American guys, and they said there's not enough research to know whether I've inherited any genetic patterns from my dad and my mum as well, who had a neck broken in an operation and was bedridden, and then she cured herself with hypnosis. So she's had her own traumatic past as well. And they said just by the mere fact of observing them and watching them, and it was true, I used to think, you know, if my dad can get past all of that, I am definitely going to get past this. And whether that was conscious or not, that was always inside me. Something always drove me just to clean it up. I knew that we could, as humans, survive, obviously. We survived the worst thing possible. This whole family wiped out. So I knew that always gave me hope. could get past it.
We're lovers of hope, aren't we, David? We talk about hope a lot.
Yeah, I like hope. Somebody told me that hope stands for hold on, pain ends, and I thought that was perfect.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you literally, I don't know about you, David, I kind of don't want this session to end, but I never do, but I genuinely don't, because I just feel that I'm sure we'll think back, oh, I wish I'd have asked that, I wish I'd have asked that.
Yeah, do a part 2, it's fine, don't worry.
Yeah.
So much.
Yeah, very much so. And I, you know, I want to thank you, Madeleine, for being really honest and showing up in your truth, because I genuinely believe that will impact so many people. And for you to put yourself in that vulnerability, thank you.
You know, to start with, it was very vulnerable making, but now, as we're talking about trusting our gut and instinct, this feels like where I'm meant to be. So it really, now, this is the ultimate of listening to my gut and my instinct. This is my purpose now. This is how I kind of serve people, I guess is the word. But yeah, now this feels like it's so much easier to be in your truth and to it was very wobbly to start with. It was very nervous making and vulnerable making, but now it's really the thing that secured me by speaking my truth.
Yeah. You are what I often talk about is this gift in barbed wire, that, you know, that horrendous event that happened for you, once you peel back those layers and there's that gift, so that you have given out so much to so many people that can relate to you and have some sort of, I would say, inspiration.
Thank you very much.
David, would you like to close us out? We know that Madeleine's pressing the record button today, so tell her when, because we've had techno difficulties.
I hope I don't get the same and I can finish this in one piece. But
yeah, me too.
Thank you so much, Madeleine Black. I'm going to look up your book, Unbroken, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. And thank you for your company today. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And Aneesh, as always, good to see you.
You too.
See you again, no doubt, during the week. And thank you all for watching this. It's been a pleasure to be involved. Hope you gain a great deal of pleasure from watching it. Thank you.
You can press stop.